The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Master Sergeant Jake Ghost Morrison adjusted his scope for the 100th time. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, each movement born from 15 years of military service and countless missions that had earned him legendary status among the Special Forces community. At 42, Jake was considered one of the finest snipers the military had ever produced, with a record that spoke of dedication, sacrifice, and an almost supernatural ability to protect his fellow soldiers from impossible distances. The forward operating base buzzed with the usual morning activity. Soldiers moved with purpose between barracks, equipment checks were conducted with military precision, and the smell of coffee mixed with dust and diesel fuel created that familiar atmosphere that had become Jake's second home. He had been stationed at this remote outpost in the mountains for 8 months now, leading a specialized sniper unit tasked with providing overwatch for various operations in the region. Jake's reputation preceded him wherever he went. Stories of his incredible shots, his ability to remain hidden for days, and, most importantly, his unwavering commitment to bringing every soldier home safely had made him something of a legend. Young recruits would whisper about the time he had taken out 5 enemy combatants from over a mile away to save a pinned-down patrol, or how he once stayed in position for 72 hours straight during a siege, picking off threats one by one until reinforcements arrived. But with legend status came isolation. Jake had learned early in his career that getting too close to people in this line of work meant dealing with loss on a level that could break a person. He had buried too many friends, written too many letters to families, and carried too much guilt from the ones he couldn't save. So he kept his distance, maintained professional relationships, and focused entirely on the mission. His unit respected him, feared him a little, and knew better than to try to break through the walls he had built around himself. The newest addition to his team was Private First Class Maria Santos, a 23-year-old from California who had graduated at the top of her sniper school class. She had been assigned to Jake's unit 3 weeks ago, full of enthusiasm and eager to learn from the best. Jake had seen dozens of rookies come and go over the years, and he treated Maria with the same distant professionalism he showed everyone else. She was talented, he could see that, but talent alone didn't guarantee survival in their line of work. Maria represented everything Jake had once been: hopeful, determined, and carrying an almost naive belief that she could make a difference. She reminded him of himself when he first enlisted, fresh out of a small town in Montana, with dreams of serving his country and protecting innocent people. Those dreams had been tempered by reality over the years, shaped by the harsh truths of war and the weight of responsibility that came with holding another person's life in your crosshairs. The unit had developed its own culture over the years, a tight-knit group of specialists who communicated often in shorthand and shared references that outsiders couldn't understand. They had their own traditions, their own way of handling stress, and their own sacred words that bound them together as more than just soldiers. They were family. Jake had been instrumental in creating this culture, though he held himself apart from it, observing from a distance like a father watching his children play. The sacred words had emerged naturally over time, a phrase that encapsulated everything they stood for as a unit. "Leave no shadow behind" had become their unofficial motto, referring both to their ability to move unseen and their absolute commitment to ensuring no member of their team was ever abandoned. It was more than just military doctrine to them. It was a sacred promise that connected them all. Every member of the unit knew these words, lived by them, and would die by them if necessary. Jake remembered the first time those words had been spoken. It was during a particularly difficult mission 2 years ago when Sergeant Rodriguez had been wounded and trapped behind enemy lines. The unit had spent 18 hours coordinating a rescue operation, with Jake providing overwatch while the others extracted their teammate. When Rodriguez was finally brought to safety, barely conscious and bleeding heavily, his first words were about not wanting to be a burden on the team. That's when Corporal Williams had spoken the phrase that would define them all: "Leave no shadow behind." It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about family. Maria had heard the stories about the unit's legendary cohesion, but she was still an outsider looking in. Jake made sure of that. He answered her questions with minimal responses, provided necessary training without personal connection, and maintained the professional distance that had kept him functioning for so many years. He could see the confusion in her eyes sometimes, the desire to connect with her team leader, but he couldn't afford that luxury. Caring too much had nearly destroyed him before, and he wouldn't let it happen again. The young sniper was exceptional with a rifle. There was no denying that. Her scores in training were among the highest Jake had ever seen, and she had a natural instinct for reading wind patterns and calculating distance that usually took years to develop. But technical skill was only part of what made a successful sniper. The mental game was equally important, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death, and to carry the weight of those decisions long after the mission was over. Jake had been testing Maria in small ways, giving her challenging shots during training exercises and observing how she handled pressure. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, and never showed fear, even when faced with scenarios that had broken other rookies. There was something different about her, a quiet strength that reminded Jake of the soldiers who had earned his deepest respect over the years. But he refused to acknowledge it, refused to let himself see her as anything more than another temporary assignment who would eventually rotate out or transfer to another unit. The forward operating base had seen its share of action over the past months. Enemy forces in the region had become increasingly bold, launching attacks on supply convoys and attempting to probe the base's defenses. Jake's unit had been instrumental in repelling these attacks, providing long-range support that had saved countless lives. But the constant state of alert was wearing on everyone, and Jake could see the stress beginning to show in his team's faces. Maria handled the pressure better than most rookies, but Jake could see her studying him during quiet moments, trying to understand the distance he maintained from the rest of the unit. She would watch him during briefings, noting how he interacted with the other soldiers with professional courtesy, but never warmth. She observed how he ate alone, how he spent his free time maintaining equipment rather than socializing, and how he seemed to carry a weight that went beyond normal military responsibility. The other members of the unit had long ago accepted Jake's emotional distance as part of who he was. They respected his skills, trusted his judgment, and knew that his aloofness didn't mean he cared any less about their safety. If anything, they understood that his isolation was his way of dealing with the stress of leadership and the responsibility of keeping them all alive. They had learned not to take it personally and had built their camaraderie around him rather than with him. But Maria was different. She hadn't been worn down by years of military service, hadn't learned to accept emotional distance as normal. She came from a large, close-knit family where communication and connection were valued above all else. The idea of serving alongside people while maintaining such rigid personal boundaries was foreign to her, and she struggled to understand how someone could be so dedicated to protecting others while refusing to let them close enough to protect him in return. Jake's daily routine was methodical and unchanging. He woke before dawn, spent an hour maintaining his equipment, reviewed intelligence reports over coffee that had gone cold while he worked, conducted training exercises with his unit, and spent his evenings planning for the next day's missions. It was a schedule designed to minimize downtime, to keep his mind occupied with tactical concerns rather than personal reflection. But lately, he found himself noticing Maria's attempts to connect with the other team members, watching as she slowly began to find her place within the unit's culture. The forward operating base was scheduled to receive a new batch of intelligence about enemy movements in the surrounding area. Command had been tracking increased activity along the mountain passes, and there were indications that a major operation was being planned against coalition forces. Jake's unit would likely be tasked with providing reconnaissance and long-range support for whatever response was deemed necessary. It was the kind of mission they had executed dozens of times before, but Jake felt an unusual sense of unease about what was coming. Years of experience had taught Jake to trust his instincts, and something about the current situation felt different. The enemy movements seemed more coordinated than usual. The intelligence reports contained subtle inconsistencies, and there was an atmosphere of tension around the base that went beyond normal pre-mission anxiety. He had learned to read the signs that preceded major engagements, and all those signs were present now. Whatever was coming would test his unit in ways they hadn't been tested before. Maria had been asking more questions lately, trying to understand not just the technical aspects of their missions, but the human elements as well. She wanted to know about the unit's history, about the experiences that had shaped them into the tight-knit group they had become. Jake deflected these questions with professional responses, but he could see her frustration growing. She was trying to become more than just a skilled shooter. She was trying to become part of something larger than herself, and that scared Jake more than any enemy sniper ever could. The evening briefing would bring news of their next assignment, and Jake spent the afternoon preparing mentally for whatever challenges lay ahead. He cleaned his rifle with the meditative focus that had become second nature over the years, each movement precise and purposeful. The weapon was more than just a tool to him. It was an extension of himself, a means of protecting the people he cared about, even if he couldn't allow himself to show the care openly. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting the base in the golden light that had become so familiar over the past months, Jake found himself thinking about the path that had brought him to this point. 15 years of service, countless missions, and more responsibility than any one person should have to carry. He had become exactly what the military needed him to be, a perfect soldier who could make impossible shots and impossible decisions without hesitation. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to be human. The sound of approaching helicopters broke his concentration, signaling the arrival of the intelligence reports and new orders that would shape their immediate future. Jake gathered his gear and headed toward the command center, unaware that the next 24 hours would challenge everything he believed about duty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of leaving no shadow behind. The legendary sniper who had spent years building walls around himself was about to discover that sometimes the greatest strength comes from allowing others to stand beside you in the darkness. The intelligence briefing confirmed Jake's worst fears. Enemy forces had been massing in the mountain valleys for weeks, preparing for a coordinated assault on 3 coalition outposts simultaneously. The attack was designed to stretch resources thin and create chaos that would allow for a larger offensive in the region. Jake's unit was tasked with establishing an overwatch position on a ridge overlooking the main approach route, where they would provide early warning and long-range support for the base's defenders. Colonel Martinez delivered the briefing with the calm professionalism that had earned her the respect of every soldier under her command. The operation would begin at 0400 hours, with Jake's team moving out under cover of darkness to establish their position before dawn. Intelligence suggested the enemy would begin their assault at first light, hoping to use the morning sun to their advantage. It was a sound tactical plan, but Jake could see the variables that might go wrong, the dozens of small factors that could turn a routine mission into a nightmare. Maria listened to the briefing with intense concentration, taking notes and asking the kind of technical questions that marked her as a serious professional. But Jake could see something else in her eyes, excitement mixed with nervousness, the natural response of someone facing their first major engagement. He remembered that feeling from his own early missions, the way adrenaline and fear combined to create a heightened state of awareness that could either save your life or get you killed. The team spent the evening preparing for the mission with their usual methodical precision. Equipment was checked and rechecked, ammunition was counted and distributed, and communication protocols were reviewed until everyone could execute them in their sleep. Jake moved among his soldiers, offering technical advice and tactical guidance, but maintaining the emotional distance that had become his trademark. He could see Maria watching him, studying how he interacted with each team member, trying to understand the dynamics that held the unit together. Sergeant First Class Williams had been with Jake's unit for 3 years, a steady professional who served as the team's spotter and second-in-command. He had learned to read Jake's moods and could often anticipate his needs before they were voiced. Tonight, Williams seemed more talkative than usual, sharing stories from previous missions and trying to ease the tension that always preceded major operations. Jake appreciated Williams' efforts to maintain morale, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally different about this mission. Corporal Thompson was the unit's communications specialist, a quiet 26-year-old from Alabama who could maintain radio contact under the most challenging conditions. He had joined the team 18 months ago and had quickly earned Jake's respect through his technical competence and unflappable demeanor under pressure. Thompson rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did offer opinions, they were usually worth hearing. Tonight, he expressed concerns about the enemy's communication patterns, noting subtle changes that might indicate they were using new equipment or tactics. Private First Class Rodriguez, the youngest member of the team at 21, served as the unit's designated marksman and backup spotter. He had been with them for 8 months and had shown steady improvement in both technical skills and tactical judgment. Rodriguez came from a military family and understood the importance of unit cohesion, often serving as a bridge between Jake's aloofness and the rest of the team's desire for connection. He had a natural ability to lighten the mood without undermining the serious nature of their work. As midnight approached, Jake found himself walking the perimeter of the base, a ritual he performed before every major mission. The familiar weight of his rifle across his back and the cool mountain air helped clear his mind and focus his thoughts on the challenges ahead. He reviewed the terrain they would be crossing, visualized the approach to their overwatch position, and mentally rehearsed the various scenarios they might encounter during the operation. Maria appeared beside him as he completed a circuit, falling into step without invitation. For several minutes they walked in silence, 2 soldiers preparing for battle in their own ways. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper in the darkness. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" Jake nodded without looking at her, maintaining his focus on the shadows beyond the perimeter fence. "The stories the others tell about our unit, about the things we've accomplished together. Why do you always seem like you're watching from the outside?" The question caught Jake off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so direct. Most soldiers learned not to probe too deeply into their superiors' personal boundaries, but Maria seemed determined to understand what drove the man responsible for her training and safety. Jake considered several responses, from a simple dismissal to a detailed explanation of military professionalism. Instead, he found himself offering a partial truth. "Caring too much about people in this job can get them killed. Distance keeps my judgment clear." Maria absorbed this answer as they continued walking, and Jake could sense her weighing his words against her own experiences and beliefs. She had grown up in a family where emotional connection was seen as strength, not weakness, and the military's emphasis on professional distance was still foreign to her. But the others, they trust you completely. They follow your orders without question, and they talk about you like you're some kind of guardian angel watching over them. That doesn't happen without caring. Trust is earned through competence, not friendship, Jake replied, but even as he spoke the words, he could hear how hollow they sounded. The truth was more complicated than his simple explanation suggested. He did care about his soldiers, cared deeply enough that the thought of losing any of them kept him awake at night. But caring and showing that care were 2 different things, and Jake had learned to keep his emotions locked away where they couldn't interfere with his decision-making. They completed the perimeter walk in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the mission ahead. As they approached the barracks, Maria stopped and turned to face Jake directly. "Sergeant, I know I'm new to the unit, and I know I haven't earned the right to speak freely about these things. But I can see that keeping everyone at arm's length is eating away at you. Whatever happened to make you think distance was the answer? Maybe it's time to reconsider." Jake looked at the young soldier standing before him, seeing not just her youth and inexperience, but also the strength and determination that had brought her this far. For a moment, he considered telling her about the friends he had lost, the soldiers whose deaths he still carried like physical weights. He thought about explaining how emotional attachment had once clouded his judgment at a critical moment, leading to casualties that might have been prevented. But those were conversations for another time, if ever. Get some sleep, Santos. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The pre-mission briefing began at 0330 hours in the operations center, where detailed maps and satellite imagery covered every available surface. Jake reviewed the route to their Overwatch position, identifying potential hazards and escape routes should their position be compromised. The terrain was challenging, with steep approaches and limited cover, but it offered excellent fields of fire once they reached their destination. Intelligence estimated they would have approximately 6 hours to establish their position before enemy forces began their advance. Colonel Martinez emphasized the importance of early warning, noting that the base's defensive preparations would depend heavily on accurate information about enemy strength and movements. Jake's team would be the eyes and ears for the entire operation, responsible for providing real-time intelligence that could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic defeat. The weight of that responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders like a familiar burden, one he had carried countless times before. The team moved out precisely at 0400 hours, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain in complete darkness. Jake led the way, his years of experience allowing him to move silently through the mountains while maintaining a pace that challenged, but didn't exhaust his soldiers. Behind him, the others followed in practice formation, each person responsible for specific sectors of security while maintaining visual contact with their teammates. The approach to their position took 3 hours, requiring careful navigation through enemy patrol areas and constant vigilance for signs of detection. Jake's senses were heightened to an almost supernatural level, processing dozens of small details, the way the wind carried sound, the patterns of shadows that might conceal threats, the subtle changes in animal behavior that could indicate human presence. It was this ability to read the environment that had kept him alive through 15 years of combat operations. As they climbed toward the ridge that would serve as their Overwatch position, Jake found himself unconsciously checking on Maria's progress. She moved well for a rookie, maintaining proper spacing and showing good tactical awareness, but he could see the strain of the climb beginning to affect her. The mountain terrain was unforgiving, and carrying full combat loads over such distances required physical conditioning that could only be developed through experience. Jake made mental adjustments to their pace, giving her time to recover without making it obvious to the rest of the team. The Overwatch position was a natural rock formation that provided excellent concealment while offering clear views of the valley below. Jake had selected it during reconnaissance missions weeks earlier, noting how it allowed for multiple escape routes while providing the elevation advantage essential for long-range shooting. The team spent an hour establishing their position, setting up camouflage, preparing communications equipment, and confirming range estimates to various landmarks in the valley. As dawn approached, Jake could see the first signs of enemy movement in the distance. Small groups of fighters were emerging from concealed positions, moving with the coordinated precision that indicated professional military training rather than guerrilla improvisation. Through his spotting scope, he counted vehicles and personnel, noting weapons configurations and communications equipment. The intelligence estimates had been conservative. The enemy force was larger and better equipped than expected. Williams confirmed the observations through his own scope while Thompson established communication with the base, relaying initial intelligence reports that would help coordinate the defensive response. Rodriguez maintained security for the team's flanks while Maria prepared her rifle for engagement, checking and rechecking her equipment with the nervous precision of someone about to face combat for the first time. Jake felt the familiar calm settling over him as the tactical situation developed. This was where he functioned best, in the space between action and contemplation where split-second decisions could save lives or end them. He had learned to trust his instincts completely, to process information faster than conscious thought, and react with the precision that had made him legendary among Special Forces communities. But today felt different somehow, weighted with significance beyond the immediate tactical requirements. The enemy advance began exactly as intelligence had predicted, with probing attacks designed to test the base's defensive capabilities while the main force maneuvered into position. Jake watched through his scope as dozens of vehicles moved through the valley, their occupants clearly visible in the morning light. He began selecting targets, prioritizing threats based on weapon systems and command functions, preparing for the moment when he would be cleared to engage. "Base, this is Overwatch." Thompson's voice was steady and professional as he transmitted their observations. Enemy force estimated at company strength, moving in 3 columns along routes Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Vehicle count at 30+, including at least 6 heavy weapons platforms. Request clearance to engage high-value targets. The response came back immediately. "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage at your discretion. Prioritize command and heavy weapons. Ground forces are in position and standing by." Jake settled into firing position, his breathing slowing as he entered the meditative state that preceded engagement. Behind him, he could hear Maria's slightly elevated breathing and knew she was fighting the adrenaline surge that affected all soldiers in their first real combat. Williams provided wind and range information in calm, measured tones while Rodriguez maintained overwatch for threats to their position. The first shot was always the most important, establishing the rhythm and precision that would define the entire engagement. Jake selected a target vehicle that appeared to contain communications equipment and command personnel, calculating distance, wind drift, and bullet drop with the automatic precision developed through years of training and experience. The crosshairs settled naturally on his target, and he began his trigger squeeze with the same deliberate control he had practiced thousands of times. The shot was perfect, the heavy rifle bucking against his shoulder as the bullet crossed nearly a mile of mountain air to find its target. Through the scope, Jake watched the vehicle's occupants react with the confusion typical of soldiers experiencing their first long-range fire. But their recovery was faster than usual, indicating a level of training and discipline that confirmed his earlier assessment of their capabilities. "Target down," Williams reported, already identifying the next priority as Jake worked his bolt and chambered another round. "Command vehicle, grid 347521, range 1,847 meters." The engagement continued for 2 hours as enemy forces attempted to locate and neutralize the Overwatch position while pressing their attack against the base. Jake's shots were methodical and precise, each one carefully selected to maximize disruption of enemy operations while conserving ammunition. The other team members provided supporting fire and security, working together with the seamless coordination that marked elite units. But as the morning progressed, it became clear that something had gone wrong with the overall defensive plan. Enemy forces were advancing faster than expected, using tactics and equipment that suggested they had detailed intelligence about coalition defensive preparations. Jake began to suspect they were walking into a trap, that the enemy had planned for the presence of Overwatch teams, and were maneuvering to eliminate them systematically. His suspicions were confirmed when Rodriguez spotted movement on their flanks, indicating that enemy forces had broken off from the main attack to hunt down the Overwatch position. Jake made the tactical decision that would define everything that followed. They would maintain their position as long as possible to support the base defense, even though it meant accepting significant risk to his own team. It was the kind of decision that separated legendary soldiers from merely competent ones, and it would test everything his unit had learned about courage, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to leave no shadow behind. The enemy flanking maneuver developed faster than Jake had anticipated. Rodriguez's initial report of movement on their eastern approach quickly escalated as thermal imaging revealed at least 2 squads working their way up the mountain toward their position. The terrain that had provided such excellent concealment and fields of fire was now working against them, offering the approaching enemy numerous routes of attack, while limiting their own options for withdrawal. Jake faced a tactical dilemma that would have challenged even the most experienced commanders. Maintaining their overwatch position was crucial for the base's defense, as intelligence reports indicated the main enemy assault was building toward a climactic push that could overwhelm the coalition forces below. But staying in position meant accepting almost certain contact with the flanking forces, putting his entire team at risk in a firefight they were not positioned to win. "Thompson, give me Colonel Martinez," Jake ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority that had guided his unit through countless dangerous situations. While the radio operator established contact, Jake continued engaging targets in the valley below, each shot carefully calculated to disrupt enemy coordination and buy time for the defensive forces. Williams provided spotting information with mechanical precision, but Jake could hear the underlying tension in his voice as the tactical situation deteriorated. "Overwatch, this is base actual." Colonel Martinez's voice crackled through the radio with interference that suggested enemy jamming efforts. "Situation report. Base actual, we have enemy forces flanking our position from the east. Estimated squad strength. Approximately 15 minutes from contact. Request immediate extraction or fire support." Jake paused the shooting long enough to transmit clearly, then immediately returned to his scope to engage a heavy weapons team that was positioning for an assault on the base perimeter. The response was not what Jake wanted to hear. "Overwatch, negative on immediate extraction. All aircraft are committed to close air support for base defense. Fire support is unavailable due to your proximity to friendly forces. You are authorized to withdraw at your discretion, but we need intelligence on the main assault for as long as possible." Jake understood the impossible position they were all in. The base needed their overwatch capabilities to survive the enemy assault, but staying in position would likely result in the loss of his entire team. Military doctrine was clear about self-preservation versus mission accomplishment, but doctrine didn't account for the bonds between soldiers or the weight of responsibility that came with leadership. These weren't just tactical decisions. They were choices about family. "Sergeant, what are your orders?" Maria's question cut through the radio chatter and gunfire, her voice steady despite the obvious stress of their situation. Jake looked at his youngest team member, seeing the trust and determination in her eyes. She was ready to follow whatever order he gave, whether it meant staying to fight or withdrawing to safety. The weight of that trust was almost crushing. Rodriguez provided updated intelligence on the flanking force. Movement confirmed on grid 349518, range 400 meters, and closing. They're using good cover and advanced techniques. Estimate contact in 12 minutes. His report was professional and precise, but Jake could hear the underlying question. What were they going to do? Jake made his decision with the clarity that came from years of command experience and the absolute certainty that his team would follow him anywhere. "We hold position for 10 more minutes, then execute tactical withdrawal using Route Charlie. Thompson, inform base actual of our timeline. Williams, continue target designation on the main assault. Rodriguez, prepare defensive positions for contact. Santos, you're with me on long-range interdiction." The next 10 minutes passed with the surreal combination of intense focus and heightened awareness that defined combat operations. Jake continued engaging targets in the valley while simultaneously planning their withdrawal route and defensive actions should the enemy reach their position before they could evacuate. Each shot had to count, not just for its immediate tactical effect, but for buying precious seconds that might mean the difference between successful extraction and disaster. Maria performed exceptionally under pressure, engaging targets with precision that matched her training scores despite the stress of her first real combat operation. Jake found himself unconsciously adjusting his position to provide her with better fields of fire, a protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. She was proving herself capable of functioning at the level his unit demanded. But more than that, she was demonstrating the kind of courage and composure that marked natural warriors. Williams called out target priorities with the mechanical precision of a human computer, processing information about enemy movements and weapons systems faster than conscious thought. His spotting had guided Jake's shooting for 3 years, and their partnership had reached the level of telepathic coordination that marked the best sniper teams. But today Williams seemed to be pushing himself beyond normal limits, providing information with an urgency that reflected his understanding of their deteriorating tactical situation. Thompson maintained communications with increasing difficulty as enemy jamming efforts intensified. His reports to base were becoming shorter and less detailed as he struggled to break through electronic interference and coordinate with multiple friendly units simultaneously. The enemy clearly understood the importance of disrupting coalition communications, and they were applying sophisticated electronic warfare techniques that suggested professional military training and equipment. Rodriguez's security reports became increasingly urgent as the flanking force approached their position. Contact imminent. Grid 349520. Range 200 meters. They're moving fast and using suppressive fire to cover their advance. Estimate 4 minutes to contact. His voice remained calm, but Jake could hear the underlying tension that affected all soldiers facing imminent combat. Execute withdrawal. Route Charlie now. Jake's command was clear and immediate. The team began their tactical withdrawal with the practiced efficiency that marked elite units, each soldier covering specific sectors while moving toward their predetermined extraction point. Jake remained in position for 30 additional seconds, engaging targets that threatened the base perimeter while his team established overwatch for his own movement. The withdrawal began smoothly, with each team member moving to predetermined positions along their escape route while maintaining communication and mutual support. Jake had planned Route Charlie specifically for situations like this, using terrain features that provided concealment while offering multiple options should their primary route be compromised. But as they began their movement, enemy fire began impacting around their former position, indicating that the flanking force had reached visual contact. "Move, move, move," Williams shouted as automatic weapons fire erupted from their former position. The enemy had arrived faster than estimated and was now engaging the withdrawal route with direct fire. Jake could hear bullets impacting rocks around him as he covered the final 100 meters to the first waypoint, where Rodriguez was providing overwatch with his designated marksman rifle. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as they discovered that the enemy had anticipated their withdrawal route. Hidden positions along Route Charlie erupted with gunfire as the team attempted to move through what should have been safe terrain. Jake realized they had walked into a carefully planned ambush, one that suggested the enemy had detailed intelligence about their standard operating procedures and withdrawal routes. "Contact left, contact left." Thompson's voice carried the controlled panic of a soldier under direct fire as enemy forces engaged from multiple directions. The team was pinned down in terrain that offered minimal cover, facing professional soldiers who clearly understood small unit tactics and had prepared specifically for this engagement. Jake assessed their situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 15 years of combat. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in terrain that favored the enemy. Conventional tactics suggested immediate dispersal and individual escape, but Jake knew that splitting up would result in casualties they couldn't afford. His team was family, and family stayed together. "Consolidate on my position," Jake ordered, identifying a rock formation that offered better defensive capabilities. "We fight our way out together, or we don't fight our way out at all." It was the kind of decision that defined leadership under fire, choosing unit cohesion over individual survival odds. The movement to the defensive position required crossing open ground under direct enemy fire. Williams went first, using suppressive fire from Rodriguez and Thompson to cover his sprint across 30 meters of exposed terrain. He made it safely, immediately establishing a defensive position and providing cover for the next movement. Thompson followed, his radio equipment bouncing awkwardly as he ran, but maintaining his grip on the communication lifeline to base. Rodriguez's movement was when everything went wrong. Halfway across the open ground, enemy fire from a concealed position caught him in the leg, sending him tumbling behind minimal cover with a wound that was clearly serious. Jake could see blood spreading through Rodriguez's uniform and knew the young soldier needed immediate medical attention that they couldn't provide under current circumstances. "Rodriguez is hit," Williams reported, his voice carrying the tension that affected all soldiers when teammates were wounded. "He's conscious and returning fire, but he needs medical attention soon." Jake faced another impossible decision. Moving to retrieve Rodriguez would expose the entire team to additional casualties, but leaving him behind violated everything they stood for as a unit. The enemy was using Rodriguez's position to lure the rest of the team into exposed positions where they could be eliminated systematically. It was a tactical trap that relied on the bonds between soldiers, using their loyalty against them. Maria made the decision for him. "I can reach him from here," she announced, already preparing for movement. "Cover me." Before Jake could object, she was moving across the open ground with the speed and precision of a natural athlete, using available cover to minimize her exposure while maintaining a direct route to Rodriguez's position. Enemy fire concentrated on Maria's movement, automatic weapons attempting to track her progress across terrain that offered minimal concealment. Jake and Williams provided suppressive fire, forcing enemy shooters to keep their heads down while she covered the distance to Rodriguez's position. Thompson coordinated with base for immediate extraction support while maintaining his own defensive fire. Maria reached Rodriguez successfully, immediately applying battlefield first aid while returning fire at enemy positions. Jake could see her working on the wounded soldier's leg, applying pressure dressings and tourniquets with the competence that marked someone who had paid attention during medical training. Rodriguez continued shooting despite his wound, though his rate of fire had decreased significantly. "I can move him," Maria reported over the radio, "but we need covering fire and a clear route to the extraction point." Jake was preparing to coordinate the movement when enemy fire found him. The bullet struck his left shoulder, spinning him away from his rifle and sending waves of pain through his entire body. He could feel blood flowing down his arm and knew the wound was serious enough to affect his shooting capabilities. After 15 years of combat operations, the legendary sniper had finally been hit. Williams immediately moved to Jake's position, applying first aid while Thompson called for emergency extraction. "Base, this is Overwatch. We have 2 wounded, including team leader. Request immediate medical evacuation." The radio response was barely audible through enemy jamming, but Thompson's expression indicated that help was still not available. Jake struggled to maintain consciousness as shock began setting in. Through the haze of pain and medication, he could hear his team coordinating their defense and calling for support that might not come in time. Rodriguez was wounded and bleeding. Jake was losing consciousness, and they were still surrounded by enemy forces that showed no intention of withdrawing. The legendary unit that had never lost a member was facing the possibility of total casualties. It was Maria who took command, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. "Williams, maintain suppressive fire on sectors 1 and 3. Thompson, keep trying to raise base for extraction support. I'll coordinate movement to the secondary extraction point." Jake tried to object, tried to maintain command authority, but his body was no longer responding to his commands. As consciousness faded, Jake heard Maria's voice again, but this time she wasn't giving tactical orders. She was speaking directly to him, her words carrying the weight of everything his unit represented. "Sergeant, you taught us that we never leave anyone behind. You taught us to trust each other completely and to never give up on our family. We're not leaving you here, and "We're not leaving Rodriguez. We leave no shadow behind." The sacred words of his unit, spoken by the rookie he had tried so hard to keep at emotional distance. Jake realized that Maria understood something he had forgotten in his years of professional isolation. The bonds between soldiers weren't a weakness to be managed. They were the source of strength that made impossible things possible. As darkness closed around him, Jake felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. His family would bring him home, just as he had brought so many of them home over the years. The legend was no longer just about one man. It was about all of them together. Maria's words echoed in the mountain air like a sacred oath, transforming the desperate tactical situation into something more profound than mere survival. The rookie sniper who had spent weeks trying to understand her team leader's emotional distance now found herself carrying the full weight of command, responsible for bringing home 2 wounded soldiers while facing overwhelming enemy forces. The scared young woman from California was gone, replaced by a warrior who understood that some things were worth dying for. Williams looked at Maria with surprise and respect as she took charge of their defensive positions. In 3 weeks of service with the unit, she had never shown this level of command presence or tactical confidence. But crisis had a way of revealing people's true character, and Maria was demonstrating leadership qualities that couldn't be taught in any school. "What are your orders?" Williams asked, accepting her authority without question. "We establish a perimeter around both wounded and prepare for a fighting withdrawal to the secondary extraction point," Maria replied, her voice carrying the certainty that marked natural leaders. "Rodriguez can move with support, but Sergeant Morrison needs to be carried. We'll use team movement techniques, with one person carrying while the others provide overwatch and security." Thompson continued his efforts to establish communication with base, finally breaking through the jamming long enough to transmit their critical status update. "Base, this is Overwatch. Team leader and 1 other soldier wounded, require immediate medical evacuation. Currently surrounded but mobile. Moving to secondary extraction point. Grid 347515. The response was encouraging but not immediate salvation. "Overwatch, medical evacuation en route. ETA 20 minutes. Be advised, extraction point is hot. Enemy forces moving to intercept. Maintain position if possible." 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours given their current tactical situation. Enemy forces were closing from multiple directions. Rodriguez was losing blood despite Maria's first aid efforts, and Jake was slipping in and out of consciousness from shock and blood loss. But Maria had made her decision, and the unit would follow her leadership just as they had followed Jake's for so many missions. The movement began with Williams and Thompson carrying Jake while Maria provided security, and Rodriguez moved under his own power despite his wounded leg. The secondary extraction point was 800 meters away through terrain that offered some concealment, but required crossing 2 areas of open ground where they would be vulnerable to enemy fire. It was exactly the kind of movement that required perfect coordination and absolute trust between team members. Maria had never carried this level of responsibility before, but she found herself drawing on everything she had observed during her weeks with the unit. Jake's tactical knowledge, Williams' steady professionalism, Thompson's communication skills, and Rodriguez's determination under pressure. She channeled all of it into her leadership decisions. But more than technical knowledge, she was guided by the unit's sacred principle that had driven Jake to maintain their position despite overwhelming odds. Leave no shadow behind. The first movement across open terrain went smoothly, with enemy forces apparently repositioning for a larger assault rather than pursuing immediately. Maria used the brief respite to check on both wounded soldiers, noting that Jake's bleeding had slowed, but his color was concerning. Rodriguez was maintaining consciousness and could still shoot accurately, though his mobility was severely limited. They needed to reach the extraction point quickly if both men were going to survive. Halfway to their destination, enemy forces made contact again. automatic weapons fire erupted from concealed positions, forcing the team to take cover behind a ridge line that offered protection but limited their ability to return fire effectively. Maria realized they were being herded toward a position where the enemy could finish them systematically, using the same tactical patience that had characterized their entire operation. "Thompson, can you raise any friendly units in the area?" Maria asked while scanning for enemy positions through her scope. "We need fire support or a diversion to break contact." Thompson worked his radio with the desperate efficiency of someone whose life depended on successful communication. After several attempts, he managed to contact a coalition patrol that was operating in the adjacent valley. "Friendly patrol, this is Overwatch. We have urgent need of fire support. Grid 347512. Enemy forces squad strength, engaging from concealed positions." The response was immediate and, "Welcome, Overwatch, this is Bravo 6. We can provide indirect fire support in 5 minutes. Mark target positions and prepare for danger close engagement." Maria coordinated the fire support mission with the tactical precision Jake had taught her, using smoke grenades to mark enemy positions while directing the team to better cover. The incoming artillery rounds landed with devastating accuracy, disrupting enemy positions and creating the chaos necessary for successful withdrawal. But Maria knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Enemy forces would regroup and continue pursuit. The final movement to the extraction point required crossing the most dangerous terrain yet, a valley floor that offered no concealment, but was the only route to reach the designated landing zone. Maria made the decision to split the team, sending Williams and Thompson ahead with Jake while she and Rodriguez provided overwatch and security for their movement. It was a risk that violated standard small unit tactics, but their situation was beyond standard solutions. Williams and Thompson moved across the exposed ground with Jake between them, their progress slow but steady despite the weight of their unconscious team leader. Maria watched through her scope, ready to engage any enemy forces that attempted to interfere with their movement. Rodriguez maintained security on their flanks despite his wound, his designated marksman rifle providing the precision fire necessary to keep enemy forces at distance. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the valley as the medical evacuation aircraft arrived exactly on schedule. Maria could see the aircraft circling the landing zone, pilots obviously aware that the area was contested, but committed to completing the evacuation. Ground crews prepared for rapid loading, while door gunners scanned for threats with mounted weapon systems. Enemy forces made their final attempt to prevent the evacuation, emerging from concealed positions to engage the landing zone with direct fire. Maria and Rodriguez found themselves in a desperate firefight, outnumbered but fighting with the fury of soldiers protecting their family. Every shot had to count, every movement had to be perfect, and every decision could mean the difference between success and disaster. "Rodriguez, can you move?" Maria shouted over the gunfire and helicopter noise. The wounded soldier nodded grimly, preparing for the final sprint to the landing zone where Williams and Thompson were already loading Jake into the medical evacuation aircraft. "On my mark, we move together." "Ready, Mark." The two soldiers emerged from cover simultaneously, Maria providing suppressive fire while Rodriguez moved toward the aircraft despite his wounded leg. Enemy fire concentrated on their position, automatic weapons attempting to prevent their escape, while helicopter door gunners engaged the enemy positions with devastating effectiveness. The landing zone became a chaos of gunfire, rotor wash, and shouted commands. Rodriguez stumbled 50 meters from the aircraft, his wounded leg finally giving out under the stress of movement and adrenaline. Maria immediately moved to his position, helping him to his feet while maintaining defensive fire with a rifle. Together, they covered the final distance to the helicopter as crew members reached out to pull them aboard the aircraft. As the helicopter lifted off from the contested landing zone, Maria found herself pressed against the aircraft floor between her wounded team members. Finally, allowing herself to feel the exhaustion and relief that came with successful mission completion. Jake was receiving immediate medical attention from flight medics, while Rodriguez's leg wound was being treated with professional efficiency. Both men would survive, though their recovery would take time. Williams looked at Maria with the respect reserved for soldiers who had proven themselves in combat. That was some impressive leadership out there, Santos. Jake would be proud of how you handled the situation. Thompson nodded his agreement while monitoring radio communications with base, coordinating their medical treatment and mission debrief. Jake regained consciousness as the helicopter approached the base hospital, his eyes immediately scanning to account for all his team members. When he saw that everyone had made it out alive, relief flooded his features despite the obvious pain from his wound. He tried to speak, but Maria leaned close so he could hear her over the aircraft noise. "We got everyone out, Sergeant. Just like you taught us. Leave no shadow behind." Jake nodded weakly, understanding finally that the sacred words weren't just about military doctrine or tactical procedures. They represented something more fundamental about human connection and the bonds that made soldiers into family. The legendary sniper who had spent years building walls around himself had learned that true strength came from allowing others to stand beside him in the darkness. The weeks that followed brought recognition and accolades for Maria's leadership under fire. But she knew the real victory was simpler than any medal could represent. Her unit had faced their greatest test and emerged stronger, bound together by shared sacrifice and absolute trust. Jake's recovery was slow but complete, and when he returned to duty, something fundamental had changed in how he related to his soldiers. The emotional walls that had defined Jake's leadership style for so many years began to come down, replaced by the kind of genuine connection that made good units great. He still maintained his tactical excellence and professional standards, but now he allowed himself to care openly about the people under his command. The legendary sniper had discovered that showing weakness could actually be a source of strength. Rodriguez returned to duty with a slight limp that he wore like a badge of honor, evidence of his willingness to sacrifice for his teammates. Williams and Thompson continued to serve with the unit, their respect for Maria's leadership during the crisis adding new dimensions to their own professional development. But it was the relationship between Jake and Maria that showed the most profound change. The rookie who had once struggled to understand her team leader's emotional distance had proven herself worthy of his respect and trust. More importantly, she had shown him that the sacred words of their unit carried deeper meaning than tactical doctrine. Leave no shadow behind wasn't just about bringing everyone home safely. It was about ensuring that no one faced the darkness alone. Jake began sharing more of himself with his soldiers, telling stories about past missions and the lessons learned from both victories and defeats. He started eating meals with the team instead of alone, participating in conversations that went beyond strictly military topics, and showing the kind of personal interest in his soldiers' lives that marked the best leaders. The legendary sniper was becoming more human, and his unit was becoming stronger because of it. Maria's performance during the rescue operation earned her rapid promotion and assignment to advanced leadership training, but she chose to remain with Jake's unit for the remainder of her deployment. The bonds forged in combat couldn't be replicated in peacetime training, and she understood that her real education was just beginning. She had proven herself capable of leadership under fire, but now she wanted to learn how to sustain that leadership during the long periods between crises. The unit's reputation grew even stronger following their successful extraction under impossible odds. Stories spread through the military community about the rookie who had taken command and brought everyone home, and about the legendary sniper who had finally learned to trust completely in his soldiers. But within the unit itself, the stories were simpler and more personal. They were about family taking care of family. Jake never forgot the moment when Maria had spoken the sacred words while he lay wounded and semi-conscious. Those words had carried more power than any tactical doctrine because they represented absolute commitment to something larger than individual survival. The rookie he had tried so hard to keep at emotional distance had proven that caring about people didn't make you weak. It made you strong enough to do impossible things. Years later, when Jake finally retired from active duty, he would look back on that mission as the turning point in his understanding of what it meant to be a soldier and a leader. The wounded sniper who had refused emotional connection for so long had learned that true legends weren't built on individual achievement, but on the willingness to sacrifice everything for the people who stood beside you in the darkness. The unit continued to serve together through several more deployments, their bond strengthened by shared sacrifice and absolute trust. They faced other crises and achieved other victories, but they would always remember the day when a rookie's voice had spoken their sacred words and reminded them all of what it truly meant to leave no shadow behind. The legend had grown beyond any one person to encompass something eternal about courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds between soldiers who choose to face the darkness together.